Today's demo is building a mast. We're building spars, which, by the way, an oar is just a spar with a flat bit on one end. So a lot of what I'm going to cover today will also apply if you want to build oars. I just finished building 2 masts. My first mast, I had some evil wood. And I had convinced myself that by cutting it into quarters and straightening it all out, it would relax. It seemed to be pretty good. I got it all glued up. It was a 3x3 square that seemed to be just fine. When I came out the next morning, it looked like that. And there was just no saving it. So that one became firewood. And I made another one, which so far is completely straight. But in the process, I did this again, which I hadn't done for quite some time. And I thought I would put something on the demo list. So this is just about building solid spars. If you want to know how to build a bird's mouth spar, we can get Craig to do a demo someday, but I don't think he'll actually build one because it's a several-day project to get everything cut out. So the first thing is make sure you have some good straight wood, laminated up if necessary. This piece is laminated out of 2 pieces of 5-quarter fir. This was some leftovers of some of that evil wood, so that's why I decided to use it for the demo. It'll go in the bin after I cut it up to make it look like a mast.
It seems like laminating would help with some of the problems with it showing up twisted at the end, at the next day.
Yeah. I don't know, that particular board was just angry.
Yeah.
And sadly, I walked around the lumber store for hours picking out the very best one. And probably any of the others that I rejected would have been fine. That one was just evil, and the evil just wouldn't work out of it. So it was a hard lesson. I thought I had it all worked out and got a nice straight blank made, and then it still was angry inside. So a lot of boats will have 2 or 3 round spars to make. There'll be a mast, there'll be a boom, there'll be a sprit perhaps, or a yard, or who knows, depending on what kind of rig you're building, but the process is essentially always the same. And the first step, make sure that you mark out all the places and figure out all the places where something registers that the easiest thing to do is the blank. For an example, on this one where I'm making a real mast and I wanted to install a shiv, before I cut it out, I want to cut the slot for the shiv because it's easy to clamp it onto your drill press and cut accurately. A lot of masts will have a square base. A square base makes it easy if it's a dry sail boat and you need to stand the mast up and then rig it. A square mast step makes it very easy to make sure you get the mast oriented in the right direction. So a lot of times you'll have a square. My current mast has a rounded top where because it has standing rigging, the rounded top is where the standing rigging just slips over the top. But it has a little rounded dowel essentially where it's cut down from 2 inches down to 1 inch. You want to cut all of those things before you start cutting the curves. And I made this. I'm not sure that I recommend it normally. I made this for this little project because it was the easiest way to make this particular mast. But you're going to have a set of layout lines somewhere in your plans that tell you what the taper looks like. And probably the easiest way to do it is simply do it like you would any other curve with a batten. Lay out your lines on your blank, measure, and don't bother to do the other side. More than once, I've marked all 4 sides when it's all square. And then step 1 is you cut off all those marks you put on. So don't bother. One thing you want to make sure is if you have registration marks that you want to transfer, let's say that I have a location marked out for something on the mast. Once you've cut it, you'll notice that I've already marked it and cut it on one side. I've marked it on the other, but I haven't cut it. So now, if you have a mark on this side that you need to preserve, draw it down that side. Because you're going to cut off, the next step is I'm going to cut off this side, and then I'm going to have a fully tapered mast. When you look at your plans, look at them carefully Some masts are just like this one is, an even curve throughout. If you have something like a sprit rig or a lug rig or something like that, that's the most common. Some rigs, though, have intentionally a flat side on the mast. If that's the case, then what you would do is you draw all your lines from one flat edge and you just keep the flat edge. You're still going to need, on the other side, to draw the curve on both. So it's only going to be flat on one side, and it's going to be curved on the face. But make sure you look at that in your plans, because you want to match the design as closely as you possibly can. The designers put a considerable level of effort into figuring out where the center of effort is for your sailing rig and where the center of lateral resistance is for your centerboard. If you move those things around and make adjustments, you're pretty much guaranteed to have an evil boat until you figure out how to fix it. So the closer you stay to the plans, the better. So at this point, I have drawn, using my pattern, I've actually drawn the curve on this. As I said, I cut one side. We're going to step in here, or you can just look over my shoulder one moment. I decided not to cut this so I can walk through a bit more of the process. So we'll go into the bandsaw, and it will be a little loud for a moment. Is the thing ready to run, or do I need to just vacuum up after?
What's that?
Why don't I just vacuum up after? That's probably, I'm not going to be cutting long enough to. This is going to happen. When you get to a thin spot, it's going to come out the side, and you'll notice that I know my tolerance is about 3/30 seconds. Somewhere between a 15 and I don't like getting closer to the line than that, because if I do, I'm going to go inside something. So it's a little more work with your hands on it. I'll come back and vacuum up, Russ, I promise. I left that part so we could talk about more. You'll notice that I drew my lines on both sides of this blank. So I've laid out the shape of the mast on this side and also on that side. And the reason I do that is the next step is going to be planing down to those lines to smooth out the bandsaw cuts. I'm not going to plane the whole thing and make you watch me, because I'll just be painting it. But the point is, you have these lines on both sides, you have to keep it square. If you're getting down close to the line, you say, well, I'm almost at the line. Oh, I'm off by a bit over here. That means you've made it slightly not square, which is going to make it slightly egg-shaped when you try to make it round. So the squarer you can get it, the better. I brought this, I was not subjected to it, but this is very handy for this particular part of the process. And I started channeling my inner Lou. I had always struggled with this thing and never been particularly happy. And it happened by accident. You know, I have a bag for this, but it fills up in about 10 seconds when you're making hefty cuts. So I plugged it into my shop vac, and stuffing the hose in there gave me a handle. And putting a handle on the side of this so that you got control in that direction. Lou has that handle specifically built. I don't remember his videos, but it just transformed it too. I had never actually gotten very happy with this tool. I got happier. This one came with a stupid little foot on it to keep the blade from digging in if you absentmindedly set it down while it's spinning. But the stupid little foot would keep you from starting a cut. So when I took that off, I got happier. And when I put the handle on the side, I got much happier with it. So that is the easiest way to do this particular part of the process. This isn't 12 feet long, so I think I'm not going to attempt to even get to the lines here. I'm not keeping this mast, but I'll smooth it up enough so that I can walk you through the marking process.
Mitch, when you're at home and something is 12 feet long, are you using bench jogs to keep it in place, or?
I clamp it to my bench.
Okay.
I have a 7 foot long bench, and I just I put blocks under it. These are actually for blocks for much later in the process, but I put a couple of blocks under it, and at both ends of the bench, clamp it down. And then you can move the clamps up and down to clear the space you need to work on. So basically the next step would be just take this. You just take this down to the line. I won't bother to get there because I'm not going to keep this mast when I'm finished. But I need it to be smooth enough so you can see what the next step of the process looks like. And you're going to do that on both sides of it.
And you use a jack plane rather than a joiner?
What's it?
You use a jack plane rather than a joiner?
This is actually a number 4. Because I'm planing a curve, I don't want a straight line. I'm planing to these pencil lines.
Okay.
And it's actually a curved surface.
Okay.
So imagine that I've actually gotten to the line there. That's smooth enough so I can mark it up. Go to the next step. So you'll find in all kinds of boat building books the instructions for how to build this. If you're a math guy, it involves the square root of 2, but it's not really important that you know that.
Most tape measures have the square root of 2 right on them, don't
Yeah. you can, what you need to do is you need pins. I've got 2 styles here. I'll show you both of them. Most boat building books show you building this variety, where you have these little wooden points. And they show you making this out of a single piece of wood. I would never cut that accurately in my life. So what I did with this one was I cut these little pieces and glued them on exactly where they belonged on the, you can see the marks.
they? Yeah, that's clever.
But you want something with a sharp point to it because it's going to ride down the sides of your spar, and it rotates to maintain a common ratio between the holes. So essentially what you have is, if you divide this by, or multiply this by 1.7, whatever, some multiple of 1.7, so, you know, if you were making an 1.5-inch spar, for example, 1.7 would be perfect. In which case, you would put a hole at a 1/2 inch from each edge, and the middle part would be 0.7 inches. And 0.7, actually 0.707 is half of a square root of 2.
And you can get to that accuracy with a pencil.
Yeah. Well, the only point to all of this is you'll never get better, but you're going to get worse from the theoretical to what you draw on the wood, to what you plane out of the wood, what you wind up with. You might as well start out as close as you can. It's not going to get better over time as you go through the process. So I'm going to start out with just demonstrating how you can make these in many different ways. One thing I would say, the first 2 or 3 I made, I used real pencils, and about 1 foot along, one of them breaks. They always show you putting 2 pencils in, which just guarantees you'll stop twice as often to sharpen a pencil or whatever. This is a 0.9 millimeter mechanical pencil. It's about the thinnest lead. The 0.5s and 0.7s draw really fine lines, but they break off instantly when you start to use them. So I have settled on this because all I got to do is push the button to get more lead. And I only use 1 pencil and go in both directions. So you let the pins ride against the sides of the spar, and you just drag this thing along the spar. And if you look, you'll see that the line is getting closer to the edges as you get up here. If you start to draw and you discover that it doesn't want to move, it's telling you it wants to go the other direction. Relief from and you kind of have to extrapolate when you get to the ends. So I'm not going to attempt to do all of the corners, but your next step is going to be more all 4 sides of the mast. My nails are too long for this little tiny mast.
This step is so you can get it to each side of it.
This is, yeah, exactly. That's where we're going here is you're going to an octagonal spar from a square spar. And the math, if you imagine drawing a square and then notching off the corners so that the remaining part of the segments are all the same length, that's what the whole square root of 2 thing is doing for you. But this handy dandy spar gauge is how you do that on a tapered item so that you wind up with a consistent ratio over the length of the whole spar.
You want it to be an octagon in all cross sections.
What's that?
You want it to be an octagon in all cross sections.
Right.
Yep.
The only way it's going to become round in all sections is if you get it to octagon first.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'm even going to bother with the last side. I'll walk you through how I do this part of it. There are all kinds of ways to approach it. I'm sure Lou uses that beast. But however you go about it, make some of these. That's a 45. And it's almost impossible to plane off one of these corners and make it square straight to the lines if you try to hold your plane or whatever at an angle. If you get it clamped onto your workbench like that, suddenly it's easy. You're planing straight down. I always finish this with an hand plane, but for this particular step, this is my favorite. If you've never used a draw knife, you might consider it. It's way overkill for this particular little piece of wood. But the things I would say about a draw knife is it's used for a lot of different things. So when you read instructions about how to use them, some users will say it's always used with the flat side down. Others will say it's always used with the bevel down. Sometimes they say to sharpen them with a flat. My grandfather sharpened this one. He was an expert with this kind of machine, and I hope I never have to get another one because this is what's called a rolled edge. So it's a very slight curve on this side. I use it with the bevel down, and what that does is, if you see that it's digging too deep, you rotate it a little bit, it rocks up onto the curve and lifts out. And of course, the very first thing you do anytime you're going to use a draw knife, your first stroke is a test. So I don't even know what's going to happen. I got lucky. Had I gone the other direction, yeah, see, it's wanting to go deeper, and I can just very quickly go way too deep with this thing. The chips that I pulled off when I was making a 12-foot mast were an eighth of an inch thick.
Ooh, wow.
Don't get tempted to get too deep, because the deeper you go, the more this becomes a splitting furrow. Eventually you get to a point where you're not shaving off a piece of wood. What you're doing is you're creating a split that it's both sides of it are strong enough, it's just going to follow the grain. And then you're not in control of the cut. But, so the way that I do it, with this step, I'll just put my knee against it. And just cut down like that. And if you can imagine how long that would have taken me, how many strokes with that number 4 hand plane that would have taken. So you get close to those lines, I can't really cut near the sawhorse here. And then spoke shade, hand plane, all kinds of things. You may need, I forgot to mention this, but you may have a square section. Very common for a gap or something like that where you're going to put jaws on. You'll have a square section here. Once you've squared it off and you've got the taper cut, you're not going to go any further, you're not going to make it octagonal. So make sure you leave that, mark that part, don't cut it. And use something like a spoke shave to make the transition from square to octagonal, and then from octagonal to round.
I find new tape between good as a reminder, not up to round the square stuff.
Yeah.
Under that, new tape will
Yeah. Yeah, just make sure that you've measured out where those things are going to go, because typically you're going to want to bolt or glue your jaws onto the side of the mast. And if it doesn't have sides, it's just way more difficult to do. So mark that out, make sure you know. The other thing I didn't mention is, if this was going to be a boom, undoubtedly there will be a hole drilled here for the tack, or for the flue. And that's also much easier to do on a drill press while it's square. So make sure you think through all those things, and making it round is the very last thing you do with it. So I'm going to get this one side done far enough so we can show what the next step looks like. Jobs like this is why I think that a planing table attached to one of these containers might not be a bad thing for us. Because the steadier your working surface, the easier it is. So now imagine that I've got it 8-sided, I've got it 7, I've got it 5-sided by taking off one corner. When you get it to 8-sided, the next step is to do 16, but there's no real magic to, there's no custom-made jig for marking or anything like that. You can come up with one, and I've done a little bit of, one of the things that I've done on occasion is I've marked, just mark the faces with chalk, which makes it easier to see when you're, but essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to make, where these come in handy. Since I haven't cut the back part here, this is going to be a bit of a challenge, but imagine that I have cut it down there to sit down into this saddle. That's cut at 22.5 degrees. So now I have this surface, this corner is vertical. And then what the next step is with the hand plane, I use playground chalk for this task quite a bit, because it's easier to clean off than carpenter's pencil when you're done. And I just make a series of marks along there, and then with a hand plane, you just start planing. Even crappy clamping surface is better than nothing. Yeah, you'll read in all kinds of boat building books if your eye can do this, and I was very skeptical because my eye is not good at doing these things. It turns out that it's true. But a little bit of a visual aid will help. And a little bit of inaccuracy is not something that anybody but you is ever going to know about. So it'll wind up looking round, but I can show you now. So going to 16-sided, if you'll imagine that I've cut this other corner off, then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make this is the new side that I just made. I want to make it the same width as those two. When I planed it down until all three are the same width, then that one is correct. Once you get to this point, from there, a hand plane, there's all kinds of fancy like curved sole planes and things like that. I don't know that they're useful because they only have one radius. So I've tried fussing with various kinds of tools like that, including a spoke shave that I just donated to Mitch West because it's not me. But once you get it to 16-sided, literally you run your hand down it, you can feel where the corners are, plane them off. When you're tired of planing, you're getting close. Use some fairly coarse sandpaper, and what I do is when I get down to about 32-sided, roughly, then I just wrap a piece of very coarse sandpaper. I actually take a piece of sanding belt, wrap it around, and just slide it up and down, and just run your hand around and feel. I mean, feel that corner, how close that's getting round already, just even at 16-sided. It doesn't. You could actually start hand sanding from there. I guess I didn't mention the other thing that I typically do is I add about a 32nd to a 16th to the dimensions of the mast, knowing that it's never going to get bigger than that. And I'm going to sand until it's just round. So you're going to take a little bit off of those finished surfaces, but that's pretty late in the game, and probably a 32nd is plenty.
When I sanded my mast down from quote 32 sides, I took a belt sander and cut it, and then put handles on each end and sort of did that kind of action along the length and rotated to it some more.
The downside to that approach is that it rounds it very nicely. When you're done rounding, you're going to do a whole bunch of sanding with the grain to get all the scratches out.
That's true.
We did one at the boat shop once, and Chuck came up with this brilliant idea of turning a sanding belt inside out and putting a drum on the end of the drill and running, and then we just walked it back and forth.
You gotta play with it because it's hard to make the belt run down the shaft.
Yeah, you have to
But
tilt.
you gotta hold the drill just right, and all of a sudden it's magic.
Yeah, it sure put out of the dust though.
That will very quickly make it round. But then, if you're using something like a 60 grit belt, there's going to be a lot of with the grain sanding that it scratches out.
Yeah, we were doing a 15-foot,
Yeah, it was huge.
and it was 4 or 5 inches in diameter.
Yeah.
So we had to come up with something to cut through.
If you're moving a lot of wood, that's probably the easiest way to go.
Whatever happened to that piece of screw set?
So the same process applies to oars, to booms, to gaff, to mast. Everything that needs to be round. When you get it to 16-sided, you just knock corners off of the plane until you can't find corners, and then you sand it.
The other approach to the marks is to actually take a straight edge and draw a spiral continuously around those 4 sides. and then you always see exactly where you are.
Mhm.
You can see every, and then you come back.
Yeah.
You know, like when you go to 16 sides, then you go back and link that spiral,
Mhm.
and everything is very clear, especially on a larger diameter mast.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, the larger the diameter, the more, the larger those slats are. So a 16-sided mast that is, 4 inches in diameter has, I don't know, an inch wide facet. Obviously not round. A lot more wood to remove with little things that you're working on small boats. Once you're down to 16-sided, I mean, it took me, my current mast is 2 3/4 maximum, about 2 inches at the end. And the hand sanding took me probably 20 minutes. So it's not a,
when I had my weekender, and it was a 3.5 inch square tapered mast, and I decided to make it round.
Mhm.
And I did the 8 and 16, and then I put a stud in the end of it, clamped my 1/2 inch Milwaukee variable speed drill to it, and just on the other end I had a wedge, with a rag in it,
Mhm.
and I set it on low speed, and then I had exactly what Craig was talking about, and just walked up and down the thing, and it really worked well. Hmm? Yeah.
kind of creating a lathe. I wouldn't want to do that with some of those spars. That evil one of mine probably would have, it was,
Yeah, this was tight grain Sitka spruce, so
Yeah.
I didn't have that problem.
yeah, Douglas fir normally doesn't do that either. I don't know what made that particular board so evil. I've never encountered it before. I've had spars that, they have maybe 1/4 of an inch, and you can probably just set them on the bench and put a weight on them for a couple of days and be close enough. This thing was off by about 1.5 inches or something, with a length of a 12-foot mast.
Mitch, what is gained by going from 8 sides to a round? Why not just leave it at 8?
Oh, yeah, I was going to mention that. That's an aesthetic thing. Larry's mast on his semi-door is 8-sided, right? And it's very effective. It takes a little bit of weight away. I don't know that it. I think it takes weight away without taking any strength away, basically. So it's.
Yeah, and with a tall mast, you do
Yeah.
want it like that,
But,
like an
yeah.
oar. Why go beyond 8 sides?
It's aesthetics.
When I built my first boat, which was a 17 and 25 years ago, and I had a friend helping me with it. He had a nice table saw, and I had very few tools. And we got it to 8-sided, and I was reading the instructions, and I just couldn't grasp the concept of how to go from 8-sided. So I left it that way. And
Yeah.
I'm still using that mast. So
Yeah, and I have seen many 8s. Well, typically bowsprits are 8-sided until you get to the Krantz iron, and then they're rounded from there on. But
Also, finish doesn't stick on sharp edges of that will.
yeah, I mean, it will on a boat that you're dry sailing, for example, your spars are more inclined to mark the boat, and your boat's more inclined to mark the spars if you have sharp corners.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
that's one reason to round it, but it really is an aesthetic. It's a personal choice. It's traditionally round, but I think they're round because they started out being small tree trunks. If you start with a tree trunk, it's much easier to make round than it just to make square.
I see what Airshop, in one of his designs, even includes just using bamboo.
Yeah. Yeah, there are many ways to do it. And as I said, hollow masts, particularly as they get bigger, hollow masts are much lighter. Rectangular section is extremely common in a. When I say screwed up mast, I don't mean improperly assembled, but you essentially cut rabbits in the faces of the mast, 4.5 faces, and then inset a plank and screw it all together, screw and glue it together. In the days of epoxy, that's kind of unnecessary, but that same construction technique can work. And essentially what you do in that case is you cut the tapers on the faces and the sides of your mast, and then just assemble it. The bird's mouth that Craig built for his camp is quite complicated. It's
In a way, it's also simple.
It forces itself to be the right shape, which is very interesting. It's extremely strong for the dimensions of it. It amounts to making one like that the tallest. Because the inside of that stick is doing very, very good in the grand scheme of were the walls half an inch thick or a quarter of an inch thick even, it would be 90% as strong as the solid stick. So there you have it.
Right.
If you want instructions on making things like a spar gauge, let me know. There's many books all over the place that will tell you what the dimensions are. But it's basically, if you make your distance between the pins 1.7, then the pencil holes go a half from each end. And the middle part is 0.7.
And the other thing not to forget when you're finishing, a random orbit sander with a soft pad really handles round things well.
Never tried that.
In my filmmaking class, my co-teacher was, because we all have that. Close your eyes, run your hand up and down. Anything that doesn't feel fair, go and attack it. But if your eyes are closed, now you're always concentrating on what the feel is. Because if you look at it and try to do that, it'll fool you.
Mm-hmm.
So cut down your sense of feel it.
Yeah, the hand method is actually pretty good at finding not quite round spots. You know, you read these things, by people who write things like draw an eye-pleasing curve, as though that's something that just any human being can do. And they say, your eye can do this. Sometimes I say, maybe it's just your eye that can do that. In this particular case, I will say, your eye can do this job way better than you imagine. When you're done, it's going to be round enough that you will be the only person who knows it is.
And sometimes you want them oblong.
Ah,
Yeah. And one of the boats I built, I never built I followed the stock for the map, I never built it, but it was oblong.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But
Or- or
And
narrow.
an oval is a variation on this that you can actually use the same spar gauge for, but it ain't easy. I think that's kind of working without a net. The boom on the boat I'm currently working on has a wide flat boom because it's loose footed, which means there's no side forces at all on the boom. So the boom is only the section is 2.5 inches and it's 1.25 inches thick. And I actually built that on a router table because it was easier. So it's a rounded rectangle.
Does Rivers West have a drawing on it?
Not that I know of.
Do we have a wish list of tools to buy?
Not that I know of. It would be a long one, I think, Charlie.
Yeah, but that's.
Yeah, a draw knife is surprisingly inexpensive and versatile tool. Now, you will ruin some things while you're learning, because as I say, if you just when you think you're really going great guns, you're actually splitting and you're not cutting anymore, and then when the grain takes a dive, you follow it. As long as you're cutting slices off, you can get away with quite a bit of an angle to the grain, but they have to be thin.
And you really prefer draw knife to spoke shave?
I do. Well, a spoke shave is such a tiny little thing. It takes such a tiny, literally you saw the 15 seconds I spent taking the corner off of that. Imagine you're doing, you're making this size shavings on a 12-foot mast. You get there in, I think it probably took me 5 minutes per face. the same job with a spoke shave would have taken me about a half a day.
You can't do it with a bandsaw, I've done it.
You know, I thought about that. The problem that I saw was you need to make some chops, and then you need to be able to slide. So if I want to saw off, I still have both lines there. I want to saw that off at a 45-degree angle. One thing is a bandsaw blade, especially on a narrow thing like that, is really going to fight you. It's going to want to walk out the inside. And the other thing is you're going to have to be able to hold this thing at that consistent 45-degree angle. So it's going to be sitting in a chalk. And that chalk needs to slide right and left so that you can guide it. It just seemed to me like, gosh, that's going to be really complicated.
Might work with a 3-foot mast.
What's that?
Might work with a 3-foot mast.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing is that I discovered when I was cutting, I cut that curve on the bandsaw just like I did with the 12-foot mast. I started out and I'm standing 12 feet away from the blade and I'm going, well, I can control this thing easily, but I can't see the mark. So I wound up building an in-feed table 6 feet away from the saw. Just put up a bar that I could rest the mast on so that I could stand up near the saw and guide it. You only need 6 feet because you saw halfway and then turn around and saw the other way.
Yeah.
You don't have to saw the whole thing in one go.
I found that the spoke shave was really, really useful when you went beyond 16 sides.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it really.
Well, it's also extremely useful for the ends. So you didn't see me spending any time on finishing the ends. But when you're getting down there where, you're about to run off of it, your hand plane doesn't work very well there, but the spoke shave is great for that. So yeah, I use a spoke shave quite a bit, but I don't use it for the rough cutting the corners off. It's just a matter of, when I had an entire black trash bag full of shavings that size when I was done. That would have taken a long time if they were spoke shave size. The thing about a draw knife, I think more than anything else, is that it gets both of your arms into it. And it's one of those tools, you're not supposed to cut toward yourself except that there is no other way to use it properly. And it's used for peeling bark off of green wood. It's used for a lot of different things. That's why I say if you look up instructions on how to sharpen and use them, it's going to depend on who wrote the book, what they were doing. But with a slightly rolled edge, the way this is sharpened, this thing it's not a pretty tool. It's probably nearly, my grandfather died when he was 90. He probably bought this I'm sure he bought this in the Great Depression. So it's been around a while. It's got a notch in it there. I decided I didn't want to cut that much steel off of it, so I left the notch.
You used to be able to get those for $10 at an antique store.
Yeah. And you feel the edge. It doesn't feel like it's terribly sharp, but it cuts like you just can't believe it.
I sharpened up mine and I wrapped it in a piece of t-shirt and I picked it up, sliced through the t-shirt and my thumb.
Oh.
So, it was all
Similar
sharp.
stupid move.
So yeah, it was great.
Is that a 9 inch?
I think that's 8.
8?
Or 8 or 10. Maybe 10. Yeah, must be 10. You don't need a long draw knife for boat building. It is a 9. How about that? Never noticed that, Mark. But yeah, you don't need you can get by with a 6-inch draw knife for most boat building projects because it's mostly a narrow piece of wood. The longer ones, if you're peeling bark off a log, you need a long one. So that's all I got.
Nice.
Great, thanks, Mitch.
Anybody want a partially built mast?